to a revealing discourse on why cultural and linguistic diversity complicates parental engagement in education settings. I'm Dr. Emily Sherwood. If you're interested in policy and education and literacy and education, please like and subscribe. So I'm going to start today with a story, and this is another story where some of the details have been changed, but we have a teacher, and we'll say that her name is Paula, and Paula is a teacher in Kentucky, and Paula's school has started a trend that's really popular in education that year, and that is to follow this guru. We'll call him Bob Schaefer. Mr. Schaefer has a school for students who are considered at risk in Lexington, and he's really popular, and his students dance, and they go on the Today Show, and they're all about fun, except for when they're about punishment. And I'll talk about Mr. Schaefer in another video when he talks about punishment, because his punishment is worse than his fun. It's worse than his fun is fun. But the school is all about fun that year. And so the school makes up a song, and the song is to the tune of a popular song. So during open house, a first grade family is there. We'll call them the Burnhams. The Burnhams. Again, not a real name, but that's what we're going to call them. And they're from Austria. And they're in the cafeteria for their child's open house. And there are children from all the different grade levels there. And the children get on the table and start singing. The Burnhams are absolutely confused and mortified that their child is doing this, because there's a cultural difference. In their society, in their culture, it would be very, very wrong, very, very naughty, and very wild for children to stay in their tables. But in this culture, that's considered okay, especially at the school. And that is an example of a cultural difference that affects parents and education. Parents have one view of something. The school does. The school has a different view. The school sees it as fun. The parents see it as this is crazy and wrong and should not be done this way. And when we talk about parent involvement or family involvement in education, there's a lot of these. There's this idea out there, and it's similar to the idea I talked about when I talked about summer reading, families in poverty, and there's a lot of overlap in that population sometimes. Not all immigrants are poor, but many are. Many culturally diverse families, again, not all. There are some very wealthy ones like Elon Musk, but many families, and most families that have children in school, that are immigrant families, will struggle economically and may not have a lot of literacy skills, particularly if they're from what I consider the developing world. The parents are from there, which Latin America, that's the big place in the United States where you have a lot of immigrants from Africa and parts of Asia. There's just not a lot of education available in some of those places. So parents often do not know how to help their children. That does not mean that they don't want to or that they can't. And that's where the stereotype comes in. I don't know how many times I've heard teachers say that child gets no support at home, or that child's parents can't help, or that child's parents won't help. I heard, well, those parents just don't care. That those parents they don't come to anything, so they don't care. Because the idea of parental involvement in the United States is very focused on time. So, and school-led events. So the parents who come to science fair night, who have parent-teacher conferences, who read with their child every night, who do the activities that are in the parent newsletter, that is what's considered a good parent. But many times the cultures are not the same, and that makes it hard for the parents. So what are some cultural differences that make life harder for parents and make it harder for parents and other family members to be involved with the school? First is language, which goes along with culture. Language is a part of culture. And it is hard for many parents to communicate. Some schools do a really good job with parent communication. It's easier to do that when there are large numbers of linguistic minority parents and when they're all of a one language group. So, for example, schools that have a lot of Spanish speakers will sometimes have a parent liaison who's bilingual. And they might be able to translate things, and they have a lot of support. Maybe they have support from community groups. Where it's a lot harder was where there's only a handful of children who speak that language. in the school. Another thing that's tied along with language that people don't often realize is that not every language has a written language. So there are many languages, particularly indigenous languages or languages of native peoples, particularly from Latin America and some parts of Africa and Asia as well, that don't have a written language. So you can send something home, but you can't send anything in writing. You have to talk orally. And then again, that's very hard, especially in these languages that may be less commonly spoken. And the parents may know a more commonly spoken language, like, for example, Tarasco is a language that doesn't have a written language. Many parents know Spanish because they learned it in school, but the level of Spanish that they know may not be very strong. Particularly if they didn't have the option to go to school. Another thing is a lot of parents don't read because, unfortunately, again, in many of these countries, the level of education that is offered, that is available, is very low. That's actually why I know some families who came here specifically for that reason, because they wanted their children to have education. It's that strong of a value. Obviously, those parents do care if they went to all that trouble, to uproot yourself, move thousands of miles away, and sometimes there are legal issues with that. You have to start over economically, but they did it just so their child can have an education. So parents care, and I can count on one hand the number of parents who have been totally unresponsive to me throughout my career. Immigrant parents, culturally, linguistically diverse parents care. They do. They care deeply. But many times there's these barriers. So to help with that, every school should have some sort of interpreting service. It does not have to be full-time, and it does not have to be live. In other words, it can be a virtual service, like a language line that you call. It can be a community volunteer who you call, just when you need help. There are lots of creative ways to do this. Sometimes they have translation apps. Again, you have to be careful with those because they're not always super accurate. And again, the parent may not have a lot of education, but there are translation apps that can help in some cases. But parent communication is key. Parents also need to feel welcome. Many times they don't feel, especially unfortunately in this political climate, they don't feel welcome. So when it comes to parent night and things like that, they won't come because they just feel like, well, we'll just be there and we won't know what's going on. Another difference, probably larger than language differences, though, are cultural differences. So I've done some videos about how schools are different in different countries, but a big thing when it comes to parental involvement is that in most countries, teachers are seen as professionals. Imagine that. Teachers are respected and they're seen as professionals who know what they're doing. Again, that's every teacher's dream. But the flip side of that is that unless contacted, and unless the parent's aware of something going on, the parent won't be every single day asking the teacher questions, won't be, sending emails or messages, won't be sending notes and backpacks. That's just something that's not done unless there's something very serious like a medical condition. Then of course the parent would reach out. But generally that's not done. And again, that's not because the parents don't care. It's because they care enough and they trust the teachers enough to do their jobs, which every teacher I know would love that if, all parents trusted teachers to do their jobs. But we do expect in this culture that parents are more active than they are in most cultures. There's also a lot of cultural differences in the way children are raised by cultures. And when we're talking about literacy, there's a lot of differences in the way that children learn literacy and learn skills and reading skills in other cultures. So in most of the world, formal education starts a little bit later. There might be a preschool. In fact, most of the world has preschools now, but that's to learn things like how to get along with others, to enhance oral language and oral vocabularies. But as far as reading, children are usually taught to read in most countries from about the ages of 6 to 8, whereas in the United States, it's more, in kindergarten, you're expected to read now. And even in preschool, you're expected to learn the alphabet. And in many countries, they don't feel like children are ready to learn until about 3 or 4. So they won't do a lot of what we might call early educational activities. Particularly, they may not read to children. And in this country, we have this idea that reading to children is the way to influence a child's academic life and to make it better. But a lot of countries don't do that. Now, those countries, people still learn how to read, even if you don't if you don't have all these early activities, you don't learn the alphabet when you're 3 years old. You don't, know how to rhyme. I talked about that in another video. People still learn how to read. It's just different. And oftentimes teachers don't know the differences. Another thing that's really common in other cultures is for the extended family to be very involved. So children may not be taught just by their parents. They may not learn just from their parents. Grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, all really important in a child's life and a child education. And that's something that many teachers don't really understand because we have the idea of nuclear family here. So this is just a beginning. I'm going to do a whole series on different literacy practices in different cultures and culturally and linguistically diverse families and cultures. And that's based on my dissertation research. I did my dissertation on Latino families and their literacy practices and how they help their children to become successful. So I looked at successful families where children had done really well in school, and saw what they did. So next video is going to be about what we call joint book reading or shared reading, which is adults reading to children or other children reading to other children in this case. And I really hope you join me because it's going to be really interesting. So I hope to see you next time. Again, if you're really interested in this, don't miss the video, don't miss the short. Please like and subscribe, and that way you can stay informed about the world of education and literacy. Thank you so much, and until next time, keep learning.